In this guide, we are going to talk about general tips that should help a player at any tier climb in solo queue. These tips will apply to anyone who will be playing with strangers during their climb. The first tip is being able to balance specializing versus overall game knowledge. Riot's ladder system enables you as a player to choose between two of your desired roles. Although mastering your own two roles will help you climb out of lower elo, eventually you will begin to match up against higher, more team-oriented players who have also mastered their roles. These players not only do well with their favorite champions, but because they play all roles, they also consider what their own teammates are capable of doing during the game. This overall game knowledge is the difference between a mage player knowing when to peel for their ADC or knowing when to focus on bursting the enemy backline. Use normal draft mode to learn specific champions or roles that you don't normally play. Draft games are taken more seriously than normal games, and a loss will not affect your ranking. A top laner who also understands how much an enemy jungler invade can affect his jungler is more likely to respond to an invader rather than just expect to carry in the late game. Being able to understand the perspective from all players in your tier level will lead you to making better decisions when you rank on your mains. The second tip for solo queue is playing with a freeze mentality along with knowing what team fights are urgent. During the laning phase, you want to be playing as safe as possible, only switching to an aggressive playstyle when you know you have ward coverage or a clear advantage. In the mid game, however, when the outer turrets have fallen, really consider how quickly you are farming a wave. Don't just blindly clear the wave. Allow minion waves to build up to your second turret and trim the wave so it stays frozen as long as possible. This will let you, as a carry, farm closer to the protection of your turrets and teammates, while forcing enemies to overextend if they want to continue farming. With this in mind, now you also need to understand what fights are urgent. Urgent fights require you to clear any wave as soon as possible and group for a team fight. These moments of urgency are when you are defending inhibitors, 1 minute before a Baron spawn, 1 minute before a Dragon spawn, defending against team pushes, or grouping for a team push. The third solo queue tip to consider is using pink wards effectively. Pink wards are not just for keeping your own lane safe. If you are clearly dominating your lane, consider dropping a pink ward in the enemy jungle early on in the game. Junglers are typically distracted early game and are less likely to notice a long-lasting pink ward in their own jungle. If they don't notice it, this will give you constant information to your own team during the laning phase. Also, simply because you have a pink ward down doesn't mean that you can't have one in your inventory. The inventory pink ward can be used when you notice your own jungler start moving toward your side of the map. Dropping that pink ward and pinging it will provide a huge incentive for your jungler to come gank in that lane. An upgraded yellow trinket and an inventory pink ward can be worth much more than just a sweeper trinket during the laning phase. The fourth tip for solo queue is to mute toxic players right away. You don't even need to tell toxic players you've muted them. Just do it and continue to play. This will keep you focused on every detail and prevent you from distracting teammates who have nothing to do with whatever you and a toxic player are fighting about. Chat log is for keeping track of spells and strats. The second you are no longer providing useful information relevant to the game, it becomes a distraction for your teammates. Our final tip to help you climb in solo queue is to use the tab button, even if your team is winning. Just because your team is doing well doesn't necessarily mean you are doing well. Oftentimes, players see a higher team and turret kill count on their side and assume the game is over. They play way more aggressively thinking that they can assassinate or initiate a fight when the players who are actually strong might not even be near enough to respond to that fight. A thrown 1-for-1 trade is not worth a possible team ace that could have been baited at an objective. These are all tips that solo queue players specifically focus on to climb. Finally, remember the only objective that you care about is the Nexus. Having the most kills in the game, having the most dragons, or dying the least doesn't necessarily mean you'll win the game. Cooperation with your team is the best way to reach the only objective that actually generates you league points, the Nexus.